Paris, March 28, 1757. Dawn struggles through a sky choked with smoke and fog. The Place de Grève has become a living beast. 50,000 souls pressed into the square, their breath steaming in the cold, their hunger for violence palpable. Nobles in silks jostle for vantage in gilded windows. Vendors and beggars hang from chimney pots. Children crouch atop gutters wide-eyed. The crowd, swollen with anticipation, has crossed rivers and provinces drawn by rumor and bloodlust to the promise of spectacle. At the heart of this living mass, a wooden scaffold looms, crude, monstrous, haloed in torchlight and the restless shiver of soldiers' bayonets. Every whisper clings to the air, thick with dread and fascination. The condemned man, a servant, a nobody, had laid hands upon the sacred flesh of the king. Now all of France has gathered to watch his destruction. A cart squeals and shudders over the cobblestones, bringing forth Robert-François Damiens. He is 42, but the Bastille's darkness has chewed away his years, leaving him gaunt, pale, and hollow-eyed. He is barely human now, a rag of flesh and trembling bone. His crime, a single knife's prick to Louis XV, barely a scratch, has been magnified into a national wound. Rumors hiss through the crowd. He was possessed, one voice murmurs. The philosophers poisoned him, another insists. Madness whispers a third. Each accusation is devoured by the roar as the executioners appear brandishing iron and rope faces, blank and pitiless beneath their masks of duty. Soldiers shove back the surging mob. The priest, ghostly and trembling, presses a crucifix to Damiens' lips. His prayers are lost in the growing thunder. Damiens is lashed to the scaffold, arms and legs pulled wide naked before the city's gaze. He lifts his eyes, and for a moment, his agony becomes the agony of all men, small, breakable, despised. The square drinks in every detail, the twitch of sinew, the pallor of his skin, the stains of old wounds. The metallic scent of blood mingles with the reek of mud and smoke. Harnessed horses snort and stamp, impatient, their bodies straining against the ropes. The executioner's whip cracks a sound sharp as the world's verdict. Damiens' screams tear through the square but are devoured by the mob's hunger. Flesh splits, bones creak. The spectacle is complete pain made public, suffering transformed into ceremony, mercy abandoned beneath the open sky. In that endless moment, Robert-François Damiens is not a man but a lesson, a body offered to power, a warning carved in agony and flame. And yet beneath the cruelty, a deeper silence lingers. For what is left after the crowd has scattered and the blood has dried, but the certainty that the spectacle will return, Damiens' agony is forgotten by those who feasted on it. But the square remembers. The stones remember. This is how power endures, by turning suffering into theater and every man into a shadow beneath the scaffold. Before Paris ever screamed his name, before the Place de Grève became a theater of agony, Robert-François Damiens was merely a shadow among nobility, a servant with restless eyes and a tongue prone to fevered, dangerous talk. In the labyrinth of Versailles, he slipped unnoticed through gilded corridors, bearing witness to the spectacle of royal decay. His employments flickered like candle flames snuffed out by sudden departures or by dismissal for insolence. Those who brushed against his path remembered a man possessed by wild moods, his conversations burning with politics and faith subjects as volatile as powder in a kingdom chained to the myth of divine kingship. Louis XV's France was a nest of serpents' tension, thickening the air. The king's once adoring people had soured the aura of the beloved, stained by defeat and tax. The 7 Years' War had bled the nation, the treasury was a grave, and Paris muttered that the king preferred velvet sheets to the business of state. In this feverish climate, words became weapons. Philosophers of the Enlightenment called into question the king's very right to rule, while the Catholic Church and Jansenist parliaments fought their own cold wars against the crown. Seditious pamphlets wormed through the city, mocking Louis and his mistress Madame de Pompadour, fueling a bonfire of resentment. Damiens moved through this world, half invisible, half mad, carried along by the currents of anger and fear. To the world he was nothing until he became the spark. January 5th, 1757. The palace at Versailles shivers beneath a steel sky, ice clinging to the stones. The king emerges from his carriage weighed down by layers of brocade and fur, his breath pale in the winter air. Damiens is there, a figure among hundreds, but suddenly calm, deliberate. He moves behind the sovereign, a blade glinting in his fist, one thrust between the ribs, more a slash than a wound, barely drawing royal blood. For a moment, even Louis is uncertain. He looks down, red stains his hand. "I am stabbed. Stop that man, but do not kill him," the king orders, his voice trembling, not with pain, but with the terror of poison and betrayal. The blade is clean, but the wound, small, nearly trivial tears, open the skin of the monarchy itself, and from that cut pours all the pent-up violence of a kingdom. Thus the ordinary servant is erased. In his place stands a condemned man drawn inexorably toward the scaffold, toward a death that will eclipse his life, a lesson in flesh and fire for all who would witness. In that moment, the machinery of spectacle grinds into motion, and Damiens' fate is sealed beneath the cold gaze of the city. Damiens does not run. He stands in the shadow of the scaffold, motionless as the mob surges and the soldiers descend. His resignation is total, as if the agony to come is already rooted inside him. When the guard sees him, he utters only, "Let no one touch the king. I have something to tell him." The words vanish, devoured by the roar of the Place de Grève, a mystery left to gnaw at the city's memory, unresolved and festering. In the Bastille, interrogators pressed him for days and nights, searching for plots that did not exist. Damiens' voice, broken, confused, spilled contradictions, sometimes pleading religious conviction, sometimes denouncing the kingdom's cruelties, the hunger of its people, the corruption gnawing at the court. "If I had wanted to kill the king, I would have killed him," he insisted, his eyes hollow. But no evidence surfaced, no names, no cabal, just the echo of Parisian taverns and whispered heresies in houses where he once served. The idea that a lone servant acting from desperation and wounded pride could breach the flesh of the king, this terrified the court more than any imagined conspiracy. It threatened the very foundation of the world, the sacred division between ruler and ruled. The trial was a grotesque pantomime. Parliament, so often at odds with Louis XV, did not hesitate. The sentence, rendered in cold, meticulous detail, outlined every torment that would reduce Damiens from man to ruin. Regicide demanded spectacle, and so the morning returns. Damiens, more corpse than living flesh, is dragged into the icy light of the square. Chains bite his wrists, his body a map of wounds and bruises, his hope already bled away. The executioner, Henri Sanson, grim, methodical heir to a dynasty of state-sanctioned killers, steps forward with iron pincers glowing red. The mob falls silent, held captive by anticipation and dread. Damiens feels the iron touch his skin, a searing, inhuman agony, raw and endless. His screams ripple over the cobblestones, rising above the mutter of prayers and the hungry roar of the crowd. Blood steams, flesh smolders. The air is thick with iron and smoke, the stench of suffering woven into the stones of Paris. He is aware, terribly aware, as his body is torn apart piece by piece, dignity stripped until nothing remains but the memory of pain and the eyes of the multitude upon him. Here in the Place de Grève, Robert-François Damiens is consumed, his humanity lost beneath the machinery of spectacle and the cold, indifferent gaze of justice. In the end, it is not conspiracy that haunts the square, but the certainty that the line between king and servant can be crossed by a trembling hand and erased by fire. The mob will disperse, the city will forget, but the echo of his screams and the shadow of what they mean will stain the stones forever. Paris, 1757. The Place de Grève has become a black altar of suffering. The mob, once feverish for spectacle, now recoils in disbelief. At the scaffold's heart, Robert-François Damiens is bound, pale, broken, yet dreadfully conscious, his every nerve exposed to the brutality about to unfold. The air crackles as executioners begin their ritual. His right hand, the hand that dared touch a king, is burned with flaming sulfur. Flesh sizzles, smoke curling up into the gray sky. Damiens does not die. Red-hot pincers descend, clamping down, tearing strips of skin from chest, arms, thighs, calves, the tender places marked for quartering. Each wound is an open mouth screaming blood. Into these fresh gouges, molten lead, boiling oil, wax, and sulfur are poured, searing his agony deeper. His cries vanish beneath the swell of the crowd, yet it is too much even for them. Men faint by the hundreds, hardened soldiers avert their eyes. A priest stands nearby, face ashen, powerless. The final act. 4 horses, harnessed and wild-eyed, are yoked to Damiens's limbs. Whips crack. The animals strain muscles, bunching hooves, skittering on blood-slick cobblestones. The crowd holds its breath, yet the body resists. Bones refuse to break flesh, clings to itself with a stubbornness that mocks the scaffold. 30 minutes of torment pass. Horrified murmurs ripple through the mass. Some whisper it is a sign from God that the cruelty has surpassed even divine sanction. Embarrassed, the executioner begs the magistrates for permission. He must take his knife to Damiens's shoulders and hips, slicing through to ease the horse's labor. The request is granted. Blades part flesh and sinew. At last, after nearly an hour of living hell, the body is torn asunder. Limbs and trunk are fed to fire, the ashes scattered into the March wind, a desperate gesture to erase all trace, all memory, all rebellion. But memory clings like blood to stone. Damiens's death brands itself onto the city not as a display of power, but of naked, trembling terror. The crowd disperses, sickened. Casanova, pale and feverish, cannot sleep. Enlightenment philosophers seize upon the scene, Voltaire, Diderot, all haunted by the vision of a man devoured before the eyes of Paris. The king's spectacle was meant to silence doubt. Instead, it revealed the fragility of a throne built on pain. In the end, the fire that consumed Damiens only illuminated the darkness at the heart of the old regime, a darkness that would one day consume it in turn. Imagine the scene, how its echo persists. Long after the blood on the cobblestones has dried, after the cries of the mob have dissolved into silence, the memory of Damiens's agony remains drifting through the shadowed corridors of history. Paris that day bore witness not just to a body torn apart, but to a nation split along the seam of cruelty and spectacle. In the decades that followed, as the ferment of revolution thickened in every alley, and salon whispers of Damiens's torment haunted pamphlets and midnight conversations alike, the stain would not lift. Louis XV lingered another 18 years, flesh intact, yet reputation flayed raw. The beloved was beloved no more, his name spat out in marketplaces, his court drowned in rumors of decay and excess. Damiens's death became a curse, a wound that festered in the public mind, infecting the very soul of the regime. When at last the king slipped into the grave in 1774, Paris offered little mourning, the city indifferent, as if history had already closed the lid. There would be no spectacle like Damiens's again. That monstrous choreography, the rending of flesh by horse and steel, the square thick with the scent of burning, the mob drunk on pain, became a relic. The Enlightenment crept over France, cold and clinical, and the appetite for butchery waned. When the revolution finally erupted and dragged another monarch to the scaffold, it did so with the sharp, indifferent mercy of the guillotine. Louis XVI fell in a moment, blood pooled fast. The crowd's hunger only half sated. The machine did not savor its work as men had savored the torment of Damiens. 2 centuries on, the memory still clings. Michel Foucault, probing the wounds of civilization, opens his testament to punishment with Damiens's last screams. For Foucault, that execution was more than cruelty. It was the theater of power, a ritual where the state revealed its appetite on living flesh in daylight, before a world forced to watch and remember. The guillotine replaced spectacle with silence, pain with absence, terror with administration. But something essential was lost in the clean cut. The shadow of Damiens lingers because the horror was absolute, the motive enigmatic. What truly unsettles is not only the public destruction of a man, but the darkness within him that remains forever unexplained. Thus, centuries after his bones crumbled to dust, Robert-François Damiens endures not as a servant, not as an assassin, but as a warning, a ghost flickering between the stones of Paris, a reminder that every society chooses how it loves to see its monsters die. Historians quarrel over the true nature of the condemned, a zealot, a madman, a prophet, or merely a servant whose despair swelled until it broke upon the flesh of a king. In the end, Paris did not care. In the end, the city wanted blood. Whatever pulsed through Damiens's mind on that fateful day is lost beneath the iron certainty of the scaffold. His execution, public, methodical, obscene, became the throne from which the state pronounced its fury. On the cobblestones of the Place de Grève, frail humanity was dragged beneath the boots of power and torn apart for all to see. As horses strained at harnesses slick with blood, as whips cracked and the crowd howled for more, Damiens' flesh surrendered to a violence that echoed through every alleyway of the city. He felt each agony. He knew in every shriek that his crime was not just a wound to the king, but a challenge to the body of France itself, a body that responded with exquisite public vengeance. His mutilation became a ritual, a warning inscribed in torn sinew and bone. This is what awaits those who dare touch the sacred vessel of sovereignty, no matter how fleeting the transgression. In that moment, as Damiens's body was reduced to ruin, the myth of the inviolable monarch was both upheld and doomed. The spectacle was too complete, too monstrous, its savagery seeping into memory, poisoning the foundations of royal power. And so the crowd departed, leaving the square washed in silence and gore. Damiens's agony became legend, and the state's spectacle of cruelty, once its proudest weapon, began at last to corrode the very idea it had sought to protect. The lesson endures: every regime that worships violence breeds ghosts, and every king who claims to be sacred must one day answer to the dust.